I'm a ranger, and I found a Bigfoot body, but what I filmed after, I found it is unbelievable. If I hadn't captured this clip, you would never believe what actually happened in that ravine. Once I realized what I had filmed, I tried to escape as fast as I could, but that turned out to be the wrong decision. I'm Harvey Chapman, and I worked as a law enforcement ranger in one of the most isolated forest districts in the state. I often brought my canine on patrol because he noticed danger before I did. That morning, he caught a scent beside my truck and pulled toward a ravine far from the marked trail. My body camera was already running, and the patrol truck's camera stayed on when I left it. I followed him through thick brush and over trees brought down by the storm as the ground sloped into the ravine. At first, he tracked quickly with his nose close to the ground. Then he slowed, lowered his body, and kept looking toward the ridge above us. A branch caught beneath his working harness and made him pull back and scratch at the strap, but I found nothing when I checked. A few yards later, he stopped and stared at a dark shape beneath the trees. The shape was partly covered by broken branches and wet leaves. From where I stood, it looked like a black bear that had been crushed when one of the trees came down. My canine wanted nothing to do with it. He planted his feet, barked toward the body, then looked back toward the ridge as if something up there worried him more. I secured his lead around a tree and moved closer on my own. One arm stretched out from beneath the debris. At the end were 5 fingers with nails instead of claws, and suddenly the body under those branches did not look like any animal I knew. I moved the branches aside and got my first clear look. The legs were too long for a bear. The shoulders were wider than any man's, and the feet looked almost human beneath all that dark hair. Then I uncovered the face. It had a heavy brow, a flat nose, and features that sat somewhere between human and animal. There was no costume or mask. I had found Bigfoot. Marks circled both wrists, and steel cable had cut deeply into one ankle. Across its back were several small punctures, one still holding part of a hollow metal tube. It looked like the broken end of a tranquilizer dart. Someone had restrained Bigfoot and drugged it before it died. What I could not understand was why they had gone to so much trouble only to leave the body behind. I radioed the discovery in and told my supervisor exactly what I had found. He asked whether it could be a person in a costume or a badly decomposed bear. So I sent several photographs from different angles. The reply took longer after that. A storm had washed debris across the nearest access road, and the recovery team would have to come in from the west. I was told to stay with the body, keep anyone away from the ravine, and record anything that approached the scene. My dog kept watching the ridge while I marked the area with tape. When I stepped around Bigfoot to photograph the ground beneath it, I noticed something that made no sense. For all those wounds, there was almost no blood in the mud. I checked the ground around Bigfoot more carefully. There should have been a pool beneath the wounds, or at least a trail leading into the ravine. Instead, the leaves under the body were only damp from the storm. A few feet uphill, I found flattened grass and branches bent in the same direction. Something heavy had been dragged down the slope. My dog picked up the trail before I did. He followed it for several yards, then slowed and resisted the lead. The farther we went, the more often he stopped to sniff the air instead of the ground. The trail ended at an old service road above the ravine. It had been closed for years and was barely visible beneath the weeds. Fresh tire marks ran straight across it. The tire marks led to a patch of ground hidden behind young pines. Deep grooves showed where a vehicle had stopped and turned around. Nearby, I found pieces of cut cable, 2 plastic restraints, and an empty dart casing pressed into the mud. My dog circled the area with his nose down, then stopped beside me and faced the trees. He growled, but I saw nothing in the brush. The dart casing had no agency stamp, serial number, or manufacturer name. Whoever had brought Bigfoot there had removed anything that could identify them. I photographed everything and returned to the ravine. While checking the body again, I found a numbered plastic tag tangled in the hair near one shoulder. Beneath it ran a clean line of stitches along Bigfoot's ribs. I moved the hair aside and examined the cut. It had been closed neatly. far too clean to come from an accident. Someone had opened Bigfoot up and sewn that wound shut. My dog started scratching at the same side of his harness again. I checked the strap, found nothing, and turned back to the incision. A moment later, he pulled me uphill toward the base of the ridge, checking several trees before stopping beneath a patch of thick cover. Whatever scent he had found was fresh, and it had not come from the body behind us. I kept one hand on the lead and followed my dog's attention toward the ridge. For several seconds, I saw nothing except wet branches and dark trunks. Then a shape shifted between two trees. It stood upright and was nearly as large as the body in the ravine. There was no mistaking it. Another Bigfoot was watching us from above. My dog barked and pulled forward, but Bigfoot did not charge. It stayed partly hidden, looking from me to the dog and then down toward the body. I backed away and brought the lead in close. Bigfoot remained there for several seconds, then stepped behind the trees and disappeared. I thought it had left until a low call came from the opposite side of the ravine. The call came from below us, close to the far side of the ravine. My dog turned so quickly that the lead wrapped around my wrist. Before I could free it, another shape moved between the trees downhill. A second living Bigfoot stepped into view. For a few seconds, I was standing between two of them with the body lying behind me. My dog barked toward the one below, then swung back toward the ridge as the first Bigfoot appeared again. Neither came closer, but both watched every move we made. I backed toward a rocky rise near the edge of the ravine, keeping my dog tight beside me. Once we were farther from the body, his barking slowed. The Bigfoot stayed where they were, almost as if they had been waiting for us to move out of the way. The clouds thickened overhead, and the light began fading much earlier than it should have. I kept filming as the Bigfoot on the ridge finally came down through the trees. It walked straight to the body and placed one hand against its face. Bigfoot kept its hand against the face for several seconds before another call came from deeper in the timber. Movement followed from two directions. More Bigfoots entered the ravine one at a time. A larger female came down the slope with a juvenile close behind her, while an older male appeared near the service road. None of them came near me. Every time my dog shifted or pulled against the lead, one of the adults turned toward us. They gathered around the body instead. The female brushed mud from its face and chest. The older male examined the wounds around the wrists and ankle, pulling pieces of broken cable from the hair. Another Bigfoot collected branches and laid them along the sides of the body. At first, I thought they were trying to hide it. Then, the juvenile moved closer and rested both hands against the body's shoulder. A low sound passed through the group, quieter than the calls they had used across the ravine. One after another, they touched the face, the hands, or the damaged restraints. I had gone into that ravine expecting to document a dead animal. Now, I was filming what looked like a funeral. I stayed on the rocky rise with my body camera running and my dog close beside me. He was still tense, but the Bigfoots had turned most of their attention to the body. The female remained near its head while another adult watched the tree line. The older Bigfoot examined the wounds around the wrists and ankle, then stopped at the stitched cut along the ribs. The group gathered closer as it ran 2 fingers along the stitches. My dog raised his head but stayed beside me. Bigfoot caught one end of the stitching between its nails and pulled it free. The older Bigfoot opened the incision 1 stitch at a time. It did not tear into the body or pull at the flesh. It worked slowly, using 2 fingers to separate the cut while the others watched from only a few feet away. The female kept the juvenile behind her. Another adult stood near the edge of the clearing, checking the trees between every movement. My dog stayed close to my leg, tense but quiet, as if even he understood that something important was happening. Then, the older Bigfoot pushed one hand into the opening. For a second, I thought I was filming them eat one of their own. Instead, its arm moved carefully beneath the ribs before pulling free with a small metal object attached to a thin wire. The group reacted immediately. The female made a sharp sound and moved the juvenile farther back. One of the adults struck the device against a rock. The casing cracked, but a red light continued blinking inside it. The older Bigfoot turned the object over several times, then crushed it beneath both hands. Even after the plastic split and pieces scattered across the ground, the light kept flashing. I had seen enough tracking equipment during search operations to recognize what it was. Someone had placed a transmitter inside Bigfoot. My radio gave a burst of static at the same moment, and my dog turned away from the clearing toward the trees behind us. What I did not understand yet was who had been following the signal. The static cleared for a second, then returned in short bursts that made it impossible to understand the voice on the other end. I tried changing position, but the signal only got worse. My dog had stopped watching the Bigfoots. He faced the trees behind us with his nose raised, taking in something I could not see. A moment later, he moved in front of me and held there, blocking the narrow path back toward the service road. That was when I heard an engine. It was faint, but it came from the old road above the ravine. Another followed, then both went quiet. I had heard similar sounds earlier and assumed the recovery team was finding another way around the storm damage. Now, I was not so sure. The Bigfoots still had their attention on the broken transmitter. The older one turned the pieces over in its hands, while the female kept the juvenile close. None of them seemed to notice what my dog had already picked up. Small red lights appeared between the trees behind the clearing. One crossed a trunk and settled on the female's chest. Another moved near the juvenile. Those were not flashlights. People were taking positions around the ravine. At least 6 figures stepped from the trees in dark gear with no patches or markings. 2 carried tranquilizer rifles. The others had regular firearms. None of them looked surprised by the Bigfoots. The cable, restraints, darts, and transmitter all matched what I had already found. The body had been placed there to draw the others into the open. I raised one hand and identified myself as a law enforcement ranger. Nobody answered. One of them shifted behind a tree while another moved farther downhill, closing the gap around the clearing. My dog tracked each movement, turning from one side of the ravine to the other as new human scents reached him. The Bigfoots finally noticed. The adult near the edge of the clearing stood taller and moved between the armed figures and the others. One of the tranquilizer rifles shifted past the adults and aimed directly at the juvenile. I shouted a warning as the first dart left the rifle. The female pulled the juvenile aside and the dart struck the ground where it had been standing. More darts followed as the armed team pushed into the clearing. My dog pulled me behind a thick log while the Bigfoots closed around the body and juvenile. One adult dragged a fallen branch into their path, forcing the shooters to spread out. Then my dog barked behind me. One of the armed men was coming down the rocky rise. I identified myself and ordered him to stop. He raised a regular firearm instead. The first live round tore through the branches above my head. Another struck the mud beside Bigfoot. That was when the body moved. At first, I thought the impact had shifted them. Then the hand closed around the mud. I stared at the hand and waited for it to go still again, but it did not. The fingers tightened once more, digging into the mud, and a faint movement passed through Bigfoot's chest. I could not believe what I was seeing. I had checked the body, photographed the wounds, and stood beside it long enough to accept that it was dead. Then Bigfoot drew a shallow breath. For a second, nobody around the body moved. Then the injured Bigfoot's fingers opened and closed again. Its head shifted slightly in the mud, and another weak breath followed the first. Whatever the hunters had done to it had brought it close enough to death that even I had been fooled. The older Bigfoot noticed at the same moment. It dropped beside Bigfoot and cleared mud and blood away from the mouth. The female moved the juvenile behind her while another adult dragged Bigfoot farther from the open side of the clearing. Gunfire continued around them, but the group closed in instead of running. One Bigfoot gripped the broken cable around the injured ankle and tore the remaining section free. Another searched the wounds along the back, pulling out pieces of tranquilizer darts and tossing them aside. The older one pressed both hands against the chest, released, then pressed again with enough force to move the entire upper body. None of it looked gentle, but every movement had a purpose. The group reacted the moment Bigfoot started breathing. The female moved closer, while another adult took her place near the edge of the clearing, facing the armed men. The older Bigfoot kept working over the injured one, as the others closed around them. Whatever they had understood when they first reached the body, now there was no question. Bigfoot was alive, and they were trying to keep it that way. My dog stayed low beside me, watching the group without barking. Even he seemed caught between the gunfire behind us and what was happening in the clearing. Bigfoot's chest rose again, slightly higher this time. A wet sound came from its throat, followed by a weak cough. The female leaned close and made a series of short, urgent calls. The others answered without leaving their positions. The older Bigfoot rolled Bigfoot partly onto its side and struck between the shoulders. Bigfoot suddenly dragged in a full breath, then its eyes opened. The moment Bigfoot opened its eyes, the armed team started moving in. The revived Bigfoot tried to push itself upright, but its arms gave out and it dropped back into the mud. The older Bigfoot caught it under one shoulder while the female cleared more blood from its mouth. The juvenile stayed close, making short sounds that the injured Bigfoot answered with weak breaths. The injured Bigfoot turned its head and noticed the broken pieces of the transmitter scattered in the mud. Its reaction was stronger than anything I had seen it from it since it started breathing. The injured Bigfoot tried to raise one arm toward the broken device, then stopped when the strength gave out. The older Bigfoot pushed the pieces into the mud with one hand, almost as if it wanted them out of sight. I kept recording. The capture team changed tactics the moment they realized Bigfoot was alive. The men with regular firearms held back while the tranquilizer rifles moved forward. Another pair came in carrying cable restraints and the folded stretcher. That told me they were not trying to kill Bigfoot anymore. They wanted it back. I had been treating the whole thing like evidence up to that point. Now I was standing in the middle of whatever operation had created it. That changed what I was looking at. The body had not simply been dumped there after a failed capture. Whoever these people were, they had come prepared to take Bigfoot back once the others arrived. The stretcher was already unfolded, and the restraints were ready before they ever reached the clearing. The Bigfoots reacted immediately. One adult dragged a heavy branch across the clearing and used it to block the first darts. Another disappeared into the trees and came around behind the men advancing from the service road. The female kept the juvenile low while the older Bigfoot helped the injured one stay upright. The injured Bigfoot could barely stand, but when one of the tranquilizer rifles swung toward the juvenile, it tried to move between them. Its legs folded almost immediately, and the older Bigfoot caught it before it hit the ground. The hunters were trying to separate them. Every time one pushed toward Bigfoot, another adult forced him back. Short calls moved through the clearing as the group changed positions around the injured member. My dog suddenly turned toward the slope behind us. Footsteps were moving closer from that direction. I looked through the trees and saw one of the hunters watching me. His attention was not on Bigfoot's anymore. It was fixed on the body cam on my chest. He pointed toward me, and two others immediately changed direction. Until then, I had been an obstacle standing near their target. Now they knew I had recorded Bigfoot waking up, the transmitter being removed, and the equipment they had brought into the ravine. I had become part of the problem. I backed away from the log and identified myself again, ordering them to stop. They kept coming. Everything they wanted hidden was still recording on my chest. I kept one hand over the camera without thinking about it. Losing that recording suddenly felt almost as dangerous as losing the way out. Now the people who put it there were coming to take the footage. The first hunter reached me and grabbed for the body camera on my chest. I identified myself again, but he caught my wrist and tried to tear the camera loose. My dog lunged and locked onto his forearm. The man swung his weapon toward him, and I shoved the barrel aside before it could connect. A second hunter came around the first and reached toward my chest. Neither one was trying to arrest me or explain who they were. They wanted the camera. I pulled back with my dog between us, but another armed figure was already moving across the slope behind them. Movement exploded from the clearing. One adult Bigfoot rushed toward us, but it was not coming to help me. It stopped between my position and the revived Bigfoot, watching the dog as closely as the armed men. When I moved to secure the camera against my chest, it made a sharp warning sound and stepped closer. The hunters raised their rifles. I pulled my dog back without taking my eyes off Bigfoot. It stayed in front of the injured member and juvenile, making it clear that neither I nor anyone else would be allowed near them. When my dog moved even half a step forward, Bigfoot reacted immediately. It lowered its shoulders and showed its teeth at us before turning back toward the hunters. There was no mistake about what that meant. If I crossed that space, it would treat me exactly the same way it treated them. The capture team tightened its circle around all of us. Bigfoot did not trust me, and I had no reason to trust it. But the same armed men were closing in on both of us from every direction. The clearing broke apart around us. The female and older Bigfoot pulled the injured one upright and started moving toward thicker cover. Another adult stayed behind, forcing the hunters away whenever they came too close. It was not protecting me. Every time I moved toward the group, it turned on me too. I kept my distance and used the same opening to get my dog into the trees. One Bigfoot drew several hunters downhill, while the others supported the injured one between them. The juveniles stayed close to the female as they disappeared into the thicker timber. My dog stopped twice to warn me about men trying to circle behind us. Nobody trusted anybody. We were simply trying to get away from the same people. For the first few minutes, I could still hear the group moving somewhere uphill from us. The injured Bigfoot was slowing them down. Every so often, the movement stopped completely, followed by one of those short calls I had heard in the ravine. Then, the group started again. They were adjusting their pace around the one that could barely walk. The Bigfoots took a different route, through thicker cover, carrying the injured one while the juveniles stayed between the adults. I moved downhill with my dog instead, putting more distance between us. That was when I noticed something strange. Two hunters who had been following the Bigfoots suddenly changed direction and started moving toward me. I cut farther downhill. A minute later, they adjusted again. I changed direction a third time, cutting across a shallow creek and climbing the opposite bank. The Bigfoots were nowhere near me now. Still, one of the hunters stopped above the creek and turned exactly toward the route I had taken. That was enough for me. The transmitter inside Bigfoot had already been destroyed, and there was no way they could see me through that much timber. Yet every time I changed direction, someone on their side changed with me. They were not tracking the Bigfoots anymore. They were tracking us. I still had no idea how. That was the first moment I stopped worrying about where the Bigfoots had gone and started wondering what I had carried out of that ravine with me. My dog started scratching hard at the same side of his harness again. This time, I stopped and pulled him close enough to check it properly. Buried beneath one of the straps was a small black device no bigger than the end of my thumb, hooked into the material with a pair of thin metal barbs. For a second, I just stared at it. Then I remembered the branch that had caught his harness on the way into the ravine that had not been a random snag. Someone had rigged one of the narrow approaches into the ravine so anything passing through could pick up a second tracker without noticing. It could have caught on a backpack, clothing, fur, or a working harness like his. I turned the device over in my hand and saw scratches along both barbs. It had not been clipped neatly into the harness. It had caught there. That explained why my dog had reacted to the branch on the way in, and why I had missed the device the first 2 times I checked the strap. I removed the device and held it away from us. A tiny light flashed beneath the casing. The first transmitter inside Bigfoot had led the capture team to the ravine. This one had been following me and my dog ever since we arrived. That explained why every change of direction had failed. The hunters were not predicting where we would go. They were watching the signal move through the forest. I looked back toward the trees and heard voices closing in again. If I wanted to get us out, I had to make the signal go somewhere else. I needed the tracker to keep moving without us, so I carried it toward the old service road and clipped it beneath the rear frame of an abandoned equipment trailer. The trailer sat on a slight grade, and after I released the brake, it rolled slowly downhill through the brush before catching on the rutted road. The signal moved with it. Within minutes, I heard part of the capture team change direction. Their voices shifted toward the road while the rest of the forest went quiet around me. The Bigfoots had already started moving the injured one through thicker cover. 2 adults supported most of its weight while the female kept the juvenile between them. I stayed well back with my dog, using a different line through the trees and watching for anyone trying to come around behind us. The trick bought us some distance, but not enough. Not everyone followed it. I could hear at least two voices remain higher on the ridge, while the others moved toward the road. Whoever was leading them had apparently realized there was a chance the signal had been separated from whatever was carrying it. My dog stopped near a fallen pine and stared uphill. A second later, I heard branches breaking fast through the timber. One of the hunters had ignored the tracker and climbed high enough to see over the slope. He spotted the Bigfoots crossing an opening ahead. A shout went up behind us, followed by more voices answering from the service road. The capture team had realized they were following the wrong signal. The Bigfoots disappeared into the trees again, but the hunters were already spreading out to cut off the ridge. There was only one clear route left, and they were moving straight toward it. The hunters reached the ridge before we did. Two moved into the open, while the others spread through the trees, trying to force the Bigfoots back toward the ravine. My dog picked up one of them before I saw him and pulled me behind a fallen trunk as a shot tore through the branches ahead. Bigfoots changed direction immediately. One adult broke away from the group and charged downhill, drawing 3 hunters after it, while the others carried the injured Bigfoot toward a narrow gap between the rocks. The female kept the juvenile close, never letting it fall more than a few steps behind. The injured Bigfoot stumbled once and dropped to one knee. Both adults stopped with it, even though the hunters were closing from behind. It pushed itself back up, leaning heavily against one of them, and the entire group started moving again. The hunters tried bringing a vehicle up the service road to block the exit. Before it reached the ridge, the adult that had drawn them away came back through the trees and shoved a dead trunk down the slope. It crashed across the road and forced the driver to stop. That gave the group enough time. The injured Bigfoot disappeared between the rocks, with the others following close behind. One adult remained at the opening for several seconds, watching the hunters, then turned toward me. My dog moved in front of my legs and held there. Bigfoot did not come closer. Its attention shifted from the dog to the body camera on my chest, then back toward the trail where the others had disappeared. A final shot struck the rock beside it. Bigfoot vanished into the trees. I stayed behind cover until the gunfire stopped. When I finally looked down at the camera, still recording on my chest, I realized the strangest part of the footage might have happened before I ever found the body. Getting back to the truck took longer than I expected. My dog stayed close, but nobody came after us again. By the time I reached the road, the engines were gone. The people who had filled that ravine with equipment had disappeared fast, and one question was still bothering me. Why had my dog found Bigfoot in the first place? Back at the truck, I checked the footage from the vehicle camera. Before my dog ever picked up the scent, one of the Bigfoots had come down from the trees carrying blood and hair from the injured one. It wrapped both along several low branches, then disappeared toward the ravine. That was the trail my dog had followed. The hunters had used the injured Bigfoot as bait to draw the others in, but one of those Bigfoots had turned their trap against them by creating the trail that brought me there. When the recovery team finally reached the ravine, the hunters were gone. So were the restraints, the equipment, and every Bigfoot that had been there. There was nothing left for anyone to examine, only the recordings. I went out that morning thinking I had found a dead Bigfoot. What I filmed proved finding it was never an accident. Bigfoot wanted someone to see what had been done to its own.